European Union and Mexico have expressed disappointment after President Trump said he would impose 30% tariffs on their exports.
We are looking for the best deal for Canada. We're only going to accept the best deal for Canada.
Mexico and Canada hit back, but not with more talk. They build a $120 billion mega corridor to bypass the U.S. entirely. A 9,200-kilometer corridor running Prince Rupert to Mazatlan. Private investors dropped $3.3 billion, and by late 2028, an 8 million container superport in Mazatlan aims to rival LA ports. The trigger? On July 12, grabs his megaphone and slaps a 30% tariff on every good imported from Mexico and the European Union. All announced via Truth Social letters. Wink to nostalgia, because who needs proper diplomacy when you have social media? Trump claims it's about trade deficits, drug cartels, and border security. Translation: I'm mad at trade and I'm blaming someone. Meanwhile, U.S. customs analysts are sweating. They estimate $4 billion a year in lost fees. No U.S. customs stamp is no tariffs, no revenue. And if 1 in 10 containers hauls through the corridor, that's $160 billion rerouted cargo, cashed out of Uncle Sam's ledger. So who's really in charge here? Trump's bully tradespeak, or two neighbors rewriting the rulebook? Canadian PM Mark Carney and Mexican President Claudia Sheinbaum weren't playing politics. They struck deals. Sheinbaum confirmed the pact, calling it strategic defense against U.S. aggression. Canada already invested $2.3 billion since 5 years into upgrading Prince Rupert's port and rail spurs. Mexico pumped $1.6 billion into 6 major ports and a Sonora-Durango superhighway. They also deployed a blockchain-based customs system, a Canada-Mexico single window that bypasses U.S. servers and eliminates an extra $1.26 billion in processing fees. In short, Mexico and Canada built a trade bullet train for industry that avoids Trump's tariff roadblock entirely. Hit subscribe and stick with us, because by end of the video, you'll see whose economy takes the first direct hit and what it means for your wallet. This isn't some conspiracy theory. It's cold, hard economics playing out in plain sight. DC's 30% tariff was supposed to strike back at trade deficits. Instead, it triggered an infrastructure revolution that cuts Washington out of millions of cargo moves. Officials estimate the U.S. could lose around $4 billion annually in customs and processing fees, and that's before counting indirect losses like tariffs and factory shutdowns. Midwestern automakers are already bracing. Plants in Michigan and Ohio warn of rail delays, sending electric vehicle batteries late or not at all. When corridor containers reroute through Mazatlan or Prince Rupert, they skip every U.S. toll booth, meaning U.S. manufacturers lose critical leverage and you pay more at the store. Meanwhile, border towns like Laredo and El Paso are doing damage control. They see incoming cargo slipping through sealed rail cars and a revenue model collapsing almost overnight. A local customs chief said, if trade bypasses us just once, it becomes the default route. Unions warn workers, your job isn't just at risk, it's being erased by policy detours. Pro-border trade groups like COMS have called for urgent renegotiation of USMCA. They argue that a joint customs response and updated security protocols might repair the alliance before Corridor 2.0 becomes permanent. Canada and Mexico have built something smart. A single-window blockchain system to handle customs without U.S. server involvement. That avoids around $1.26 billion in CBP fees. The gridlocked ledger simply reads 0 for U.S. revenue. Once freight starts calling the corridor route a habit, rebuilding trust in U.S.-based supply chains could take years, even if tariffs disappear later. U.S. firms are suddenly competing on efficiency and cost, not just made in America. As clock ticked towards August 1st, Mexico responded. Not with drama, but with steady action. President Claudia Sheinbaum called President Trudeau's successor, Mark Carney, to forge a joint shield. Their words:
We're only going to accept the best deal for Canada.
Protect our sovereignty and no longer rely on Washington's mercy. 4 days later, the Northern Corridor emerged. A $130 billion railport highway arc circling the U.S. border, designed to reroute commodities like EV batteries, auto parts, and soy around Washington's trade barriers. Here's the kicker. That private consortium footing the bill dropped $3.3 billion, while both governments are shelling out billions more. Prince Rupert in Canada already handles 23 million tons a year. Mazatlan aims to overtake LA with 8 million containers annually. These power moves aren't symbolic. They're about economic sovereignty and cost Washington about $126 in entry fees. Customs analysts estimate a $4 billion annual loss and a 6-year job impact in the 39 to 69 range, many in auto supply chains and Midwest logistics. That means Detroit automakers pay more for coil steel. Battery plants in Monterrey reroute shipments. Consumers may pay 4 cents more per dollar at checkout. Meanwhile, border passage towns like Laredo and El Paso are begging for a redo. Once freight hops the bypass train, that becomes the default, laments a Midwest customs official. Pressure is mounting on Capitol Hill. Republican senators from Michigan, Wisconsin, and Ohio fear campaign losses unless Washington acts. Call for renegotiating USMCA or counter trade pressure grows louder. And while the U.S. flirts with confrontation, Europe quietly cut a deal. On July 27th, EU leaders accepted a 15% tariff, half of Trump's threatened 30%, and opened doors to $600 billion in U.S. investments and increased energy buys. But note the difference. Europe gets negotiation. Mexico gets infrastructure. Canada gets the corridor. Washington wields tariffs. Their neighbors build workarounds. So what's the lesson? Europe accepted a moderate loss to avoid a full-blown trade war. North America, Canada, and Mexico chose a rewiring, not compromise. The U.S. side is scrambling. Senators from the Midwest are demanding renegotiation of USMCA. Trade groups like COMC are pushing for updated customs cooperation. They're essentially saying, fix it or lose it. Europe, they played it differently. Rather than build bypass corridors, EU leaders struck a 15% tariff deal with the US and unlocked $600 billion in investments, a calmer strategy that avoided the corridor's seismic disruption. That's your fork in the road. EU used diplomacy. North America preferred action. 2 continents, 2 trade strategies, with outcomes that may no longer be reversible. But infrastructure isn't built in a day. The corridor is set to be fully functional by 2028, with a formal treaty signing expected in September 2025. That gives supply chains time to reroute and governments less time to catch up. Now the real question, where do you predict this ends? Does Washington blink? Or is this corridor destined to become America's greatest supply chain bypass? Comment your thought below and subscribe to Impact News Live, because while they argue on Capitol Hill, the rest of the world is moving on.